5:15 p.m., November 4th, 2025, Louisville, Kentucky. Temperature 55 degrees Fahrenheit, partly cloudy skies, light winds from the northwest at 8 knots. A McDonnell Douglas MD-11F, loaded to near maximum weight, accelerates down runway 17 right at Muhammad Ali International Airport. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the asphalt. 80 knots, 100 knots, 120 knots, 150 knots. The aircraft gains speed steadily, each of its 3 engines generating 61 to 500 pounds of thrust. Suddenly, without warning, orange flames explode from the center engine. The fire isn't a small flame, it's a fireball projecting several meters behind the tail. The tower sees everything and screams over the radio alerting about the fire. But the airspeed indicator already reads 155 knots. The aircraft has passed V1, the point of no return. The captain has less than 30 seconds to decide between continuing takeoff with an engine transformed into a torch or attempting the impossible. Abort and collide with the end of the runway at over 180 miles per hour with 38,000 gallons of fuel on board. How is it possible for a modern aircraft equipped with 3 engines to lose lift right after takeoff in perfect weather conditions? Why did highly experienced pilots continue accelerating even with visible fire, consuming one of the engines? Who will survive when 38,000 gallons of jet fuel collide with an industrial zone full of petroleum and flammable materials? What failed on an aircraft that had just passed through heavy maintenance less than a month ago? This is another story about critical decisions made in fractions of a second, decisions that separate life from death, and about how sometimes in aviation, doing everything right still isn't enough. I'm Captain Peter Mercer. I've got 25 years of experience in commercial aviation, flown pretty much every model of commercial jet you can imagine, and what you're about to hear is the story of UPS Flight 2976, told from the point of view of a pilot who understands every decision, every procedure, every second of terror that crew lived through. Buckle up. Welcome aboard. November 4th, 2025. Muhammad Ali International Airport, Louisville, Kentucky, the beating heart of UPS. Let me explain something about Louisville, my friend. This isn't just any city when we're talking about cargo aviation. We're talking about the absolute epicenter, the beating heart of UPS Airlines, the famous Worldport. You know what that is? It's the largest package processing center on planet Earth. Let me give you some numbers so you understand the scale of this thing. More than 20,000 people work there. That's not a typo. 20,000 people. Every single night, they process over 2 million packages. That's 2 million boxes, envelopes, shipments that need to be sorted, loaded, and sent to the right places. While you're sleeping comfortably in your bed, my co-pilot, the Worldport transforms into a perfectly orchestrated machine. More than 100 aircraft, let me repeat that, more than 100 aircraft, take off and land there within a few hours. It's a choreography of metal, fuel, and chronometric precision. Packages leaving New York at 8 p.m. arrive in Tokyo before noon the next day, local time. That's modern logistics functioning at its absolute peak. The airport itself processes over 5.7 million tons of cargo per year. To give you a comparison, that's more cargo than many entire countries move. Louisville, Kentucky, because of UPS, became the second busiest airport in the United States in terms of air cargo, losing only to Memphis, which, ironically, is FedEx's hub. See the irony? The conditions, almost too perfect. And on that specific afternoon of November 4th, the weather was practically flawless. Look at these numbers. Partly cloudy skies with cloud cover at 3,500 feet, meaning there were some clouds but nothing that would interfere with operations. Visibility of 7 miles, which is excellent. You can clearly see the horizon. Calm winds of only 8 knots blowing from 310 degrees. That's from the northwest. Pleasant temperature of 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Runway 17 right was completely dry, without any contamination from water, ice, or debris. From a meteorological standpoint, my friend, it was an absolutely normal routine day without any weather factor that could complicate a takeoff. No wind shear. No reported turbulence, no thunderstorms in the area. It was the kind of day when you look at the sky and think, today's going to be smooth. Pay attention to this because it's important. When tragedy happens in perfect weather conditions, it means the problem is somewhere else, and in this case it was. The aircraft, a 34-year-old giant. Pay attention now because this part is crucial to understanding what happened. The aircraft was a McDonnell Douglas MD-11F, registration November 259th, uniform Papa, or N259 up, as we say in aviation. The F at the end means freighter, cargo plane. This is a wide-body trijet, meaning it has 3 powerful engines and a really fat fuselage, specifically designed and optimized for heavy international cargo operations. This particular plane had a long and interesting history. It was built in 1991 at the McDonnell Douglas facilities in Long Beach, California. Let me give you the serial number, 48417. That means it was the 417th MD-11 to come off the production line. It started its life operating passenger flights for Thai Airways International, Thailand's national airline. For years, it transported tourists and business travelers between Bangkok and destinations around the world. In 2006, almost 15 years after being built, the aircraft underwent a complex and expensive process called passenger-to-cargo conversion. You know what that means? They ripped out all the seats, removed the passenger windows, sealed them with aluminum plates, installed cargo restraint systems, reinforced the floor, modified electrical and hydraulic systems. It's practically rebuilding the plane from scratch. This conversion cost millions of dollars, and then the aircraft was transferred to UPS Airlines. Since 2006, N259 up had been flying cargo routes for UPS. During those 19 years with the company, it accumulated tens of thousands of flight hours, crossed oceans countless times, transported millions of packages. And here's a detail you need to know. That aircraft had just gone through heavy maintenance, what we call a heavy check, at UPS facilities in San Antonio, Texas. This maintenance wasn't something simple. In a heavy check, they literally dismantle significant parts of the plane, inspect structures, replace components, test systems. It had returned to active service less than a month ago. Everything checked, everything approved, everything within manufacturer specifications. Now look at the dimensions of this machine, because this will help you visualize what we're talking about. Over 169 feet of wingspan. That's the distance from wingtip to wingtip. Over 200 feet in length. Imagine 2 school buses one behind the other, and you're still short. The tail height goes to almost 60 feet off the ground. That's a 5-story building. The engines, monsters of power. And the engines, my friend, here's where things get serious. Each of the 3 engines was a General Electric CF6 80C2D1F. Let me translate what that means in terms of power. Each engine is capable of generating 61,500 pounds of thrust. Multiply that by 3. To give you an idea of what that represents, each engine produces enough energy to keep a Formula One car at 250 miles per hour. And there are 3 of these engines on the plane. 1 on the pylon of each wing, and the third, pay attention to this, mounted at the base of the tail, fed by fuel lines running the entire length of the fuselage from the tanks in the wings. This tail engine configuration is peculiar to the MD-11. It's a heritage from the DC-10 design, its predecessor. And you know why? Because with 3 engines you have redundancy. If you lose 1 engine, you still have 2. If you lose 2 engines, which is extremely rare, you still have 1. It's safety through redundancy. But here's the problem nobody tells you. When you lose precisely the tail engine in certain phases of flight, the situation gets complicated because that engine doesn't just produce thrust, it also helps stabilize the aircraft. Losing it creates complex aerodynamic asymmetries. The load at weight limits. The cargo capacity of that MD-11F was approximately 200,000 pounds. That afternoon, the plane was transporting a varied load of UPS packages, documents, electronics, replacement parts, correspondence, gifts, the kind of normal cargo that moves through a logistics network every day. Nothing classified as dangerous, nothing flammable according to cargo manifests, just ordinary packages destined for Hawaii. But here's the absolutely critical detail, my co-pilot. The aircraft received about 38,000 gallons of Jet A1 fuel. You know why? Because it was going to fly over 8 hours straight to Honolulu, crossing almost the entire American continent and then a substantial portion of the Pacific Ocean. Can't make stops in the middle of the ocean, right? Let's do the math here. 38,000 gallons are approximately 144,000 liters of fuel. The density of Jet A1 is about 0.8 kilograms per liter. That means just in fuel, that plane was carrying about 253,000 pounds. Add the package cargo, the empty structure of the plane, which weighs about 286,000 pounds, the crew, equipment. You get very close to the MD-11F's maximum takeoff weight, which is around 630,000 pounds. And why does this matter? Because the heavier the plane, the more speed you need to take off, more power you need from the engines, more runway you consume, and more critical any failure becomes. If you lose an engine with the plane light, it's manageable. If you lose an engine at maximum weight right after V1, well, you're going to see real soon what happens. The crew, professionals with thousands of hours. 3 pilots were traveling aboard. These weren't rookies fresh out of flight school, my friend. We're talking about experienced professionals, each with thousands of flight hours in international cargo operations. These guys knew the MD-11 like you know the route from your house to work. Although the crew's full names haven't been publicly released by authorities, out of respect for families, here's what we know. They were UPS Airlines line pilots with impeccable records. They'd been approved in all their recent evaluations, what we call check rides, with standards classified as above average. That's not easy to achieve. Commercial pilot evaluations are rigorous, detailed, technical. You need to demonstrate proficiency in normal procedures, abnormal procedures, emergencies, navigation, communications. The captain had thousands of hours on the MD-11 specifically. The first officer too. The third pilot, because on long international cargo flights you usually take an extra pilot for relief, equally qualified and experienced. These men weren't cowboys. They weren't reckless. They were serious professionals doing a serious job. The flight, a routine trans-Pacific route. UPS Flight 2976. Origin, Louisville, Kentucky. Destination, Daniel K. Inouye International Airport in Honolulu, Hawaii. Distance, approximately 4,600 miles in a straight line, but air routes are never straight lines. With deviations to optimize winds, avoid congested traffic areas, and follow established airways, the actual distance would be greater. Estimated flight time 8 hours and 15 minutes. Planned cruise altitude, probably between 35,000 and 39,000 feet. That's between 6.5 and 7.5 miles altitude. Up there the air is thin, engines are more efficient, you consume less fuel per mile flown. Passengers aboard, 0. Only the crew of 3 pilots, the constant roar of engines, and the silent but immense responsibility of delivering thousands of packages on time. Seems simple, but think about it. Someone in Louisville sent a critical document that needs to be in Honolulu the next morning. Someone sent a birthday gift to a grandchild living in Hawaii. A company needs an urgent part. Every package on that plane represents a promise UPS made to a customer, and the pilots carry all those promises on their shoulders. Task 4:30 p.m. Meticulous preparation. The MD-11 is parked in the Worldport maintenance hangar completing pre-flight procedures. The MD-11 checklist is no joke. Pages and pages of items that need to be verified before each flight. Hydraulic systems, checked. 3 independent hydraulic systems, all with normal pressure. Electrical systems, checked. Generators running, batteries charged, inverters operational. Fuel, checked. Loaded quantity matches planned, no contamination detected, adequate distribution among tanks. Flight controls, checked. The pilots move the yoke and pedals, verifying that control surfaces respond correctly. Ailerons, elevators, rudder, flaps, slats, everything working smoothly. Engines, each of the 3 General Electric CF6 is visually inspected. Mechanics check for oil leaks, verify turbine blades are intact, check for FOD damage, foreign object damage. Look, my friend, one thing the general public doesn't understand is how meticulous this preparation phase is. It's not pushing an ignition button and flying off. Dozens of people are involved. Mechanics, fueling technicians, cargo supervisors, flight dispatchers, meteorologists, each one doing their part to ensure that plane is ready to fly safely. Outside, package loading is practically complete. Forklifts move giant pallets full of boxes. Each pallet weighs hundreds of pounds, and needs to be positioned correctly inside the plane to maintain the center of gravity within limits. Too much weight forward, the plane becomes nose-heavy, too heavy in the nose. Too much weight aft, it becomes tail-heavy. Both are dangerous. Everything checks out. Everything within normal parameters. Everything exactly as it should be. 50 p.m. Crew briefing. The three pilots meet for the final briefing. They discuss the route, expected weather, alternate airports in case they need to divert, emergency procedures specific to the Trans-Pacific route. One of the topics discussed is precisely what to do in case of engine failure after V1, something they've trained hundreds of times in simulators, but none of them has ever experienced in a real aircraft. The procedure is clear. If you lose an engine after V1, continue the takeoff. Maintain V2 speed, take off safety speed, climb to a safe altitude. Then assess the situation and decide whether to return or continue to destination. None of them could imagine that in less than 30 minutes they'd have to execute exactly that procedure, and that it wouldn't work. 5 p.m. Taxi and initial communications. The aircraft moves slowly toward the runway. The weight is obvious. Even on the ground, the MD-11 moves with a kind of heavy, ponderous inertia. The world port is in full activity around them. To the left, another UPS freighter is being unloaded. To the right, a 767 from the same company is doing pushback. Further ahead, a gigantic 747-8F rolls toward the main runway. It's like a ballet of aluminum giants. The MD-11 follows taxiway Bravo toward the threshold of runway 17 right. Ground navigation is done following yellow lines painted on the asphalt and blue lights embedded along the taxiways. The co-pilot monitors attentively to ensure they're on the correct route. A ground navigation error can cause a runway incursion, which is when you enter an active runway by mistake. That can be fatal. During taxi, the pilots do the last checks. Flaps programmed for takeoff, probably 15-degree configuration, slats extended, trims adjusted, brakes tested. The captain mentally reviews the V speeds, critical speeds for that specific takeoff. V1, decision speed, VR, rotation speed where you pull the yoke to raise the nose, and V2, takeoff safety speed. With the weight they're carrying, V1 is calculated at approximately 155 knots. That's about 178 miles per hour. VR is a few knots above that. V2 probably around 180 knots. These numbers are critical and were calculated by the takeoff performance computer, considering aircraft weight, air temperature, airport altitude, runway length, and other factors. The pilots contact the tower. Louisville Tower, UPS 2976, heavy, ready for departure, runway 17 right. The word heavy isn't random. It's mandatory for aircraft over 300,000 pounds because behind them forms something called wake turbulence, vortices of spinning air coming off the wingtips that can knock down smaller planes. That's why you tell the tower you're heavy. The tower's response comes clear and professional. UPS 2976 heavy, cleared for takeoff, runway 17 right, wind 310 at 8 knots, clearance granted, wind informed, everything within normal. 5:15 1 p.m. Takeoff roll begins. The captain aligns the aircraft with the runway centerline. Through the windshield, they see 12,000 feet of asphalt stretching ahead. Runway 17R at Louisville is long, but with the weight they're carrying, they're going to use a good part of it. Checks complete. Clearance received. Let's go, says the captain. The co-pilot places his hand on the thrust levers and pushes gently forward. The three General Electric engines respond immediately. The roar is deafening even inside the acoustically insulated cabin. It's a deep, profound, visceral sound. 184,500 pounds of thrust waking up. The MD-11 begins to accelerate, slowly at first because of inertia, but rapidly gaining speed. 40 knots, 60 knots, 80 knots. The co-pilot reads the speeds. 80 knots. This is a mandatory call-out. Confirms that instruments are working correctly on both sides. 100 knots, 120 knots. The aircraft is now accelerating rapidly. The roar of engines mixes with the whistle of wind and the noise of wheels over expansion joints in the asphalt. 140 knots. V1, the co-pilot shouts. This is the decision point. After V1, you're committed. Doesn't matter what happens. The only option is to continue and take off. Physics doesn't forgive. 150 knots, 160 knots. Seconds remain until VR, the speed where the captain will pull the yoke and raise the nose. 15:30 p.m., the first anomaly, fire in the center engine. And then it happens. Pay very close attention to what comes now, my co-pilot, because this is the moment where everything falls apart. Airport surveillance cameras, those cameras monitoring the runways 24 hours a day, capture something absolutely terrible. Flames of a bright, intense orange begin to pour from engine number 2. Not a small, discrete flame. Real fire. A fireball projecting meters behind the tailbase. In the control tower, a controller sees this through the window. His heart races. He grabs the microphone and transmits immediately, "UPS 2976, you have visible fire on the center engine. Repeat, fire on engine number 2. Inside the MD-11 cabin, alarms begin to sound. Red warning lights flash on the panel. One of the panels clearly shows ENG-2 fire. Fire on engine 2. But here's the absolutely brutal problem, my friend. Let me be crystal clear about something. They've already passed V1. The airspeed indicator reads 158 knots when the fire is detected. They're above decision speed. The captain has maybe 2 seconds to process this. 2 seconds to make the most important decision of his life. Abort or continue? If abort, they have to cut power immediately, hit the brakes hard, reverse the remaining engines, but physics is cruel. With that speed and that weight, they'll probably go off the end of the runway. And then collide with containment barriers, with airport buildings, with other parked aircraft, with 38,000 gallons of fuel on board. If continue, follow trained procedure. Try to take off with 2.5 engines, because the burning engine might still be generating some thrust before it fails completely. Gain altitude, get away from the airport. Then assess. 5:15:40 p.m., the impossible decision. "Continuing," the captain shouts. It's the correct decision according to all manuals, all training, all simulations they've done. After V1, you continue. Always. The co-pilot keeps the thrust levers pushed forward. Engines number 1 and number 3, the wing engines, stay at maximum power. Engine number 2 is self-destructing. 165 knots. 170 knots. Rotate, VR reached. The captain pulls the yoke back. The nose of the MD-11 begins to rise, 10 degrees, 12 degrees, 15 degrees of pitch. The main wheels are still on the ground, still rolling down the runway, consuming the remaining meters. And then, with an almost imperceptible sigh from the suspension, the main wheels separate from the asphalt. They're flying, or at least, technically, they're in the air. 15:50 p.m. Critical lift. The plane that won't climb. But something is terribly, horribly wrong. The MD-11 isn't climbing. Or rather, it's climbing, but at a pathetic angle. The rate of climb that should be 2,000 feet per minute is maybe 300 feet per minute. It's almost nothing. The captain has already retracted the landing gear. The wheels come up and the gear compartment doors close, reducing drag. He keeps the nose raised, desperately trying to gain altitude. But the aircraft responds as if stuck in molasses. Why? Pure physics, my friend. First, they lost 33% of available power, 1 engine out of 3. With the plane at maximum weight, you need all 3 engines working on takeoff. Second, the burning engine isn't just not producing thrust, it's producing drag. The fire consumed critical parts of the nacelle, that aerodynamic covering around the engine. Pieces of melted metal are being ripped away by the airflow. All that damaged structure is acting like a giant aerodynamic brake. Third, the position of the engine on the tail means the aircraft's CG, center of gravity, was asymmetrically affected. The captain is having to apply constant control inputs just to keep the wings level. Fourth, they're heavy. 30,000 pounds don't want to climb easily. Takes a lot of energy to lift that mass against gravity. The altimeter climbs painfully slowly. 50 feet, 75 feet, 100 feet. 16 p.m., maximum altitude. 175 feet of desperation. The aircraft reaches 175 feet above ground level. That's a measly 53 meters, my friend. To give you a sense, a 15-story building is about 165 feet tall. They're flying at the height of a medium-sized residential building. And worse, The airspeed indicator shows 186 knots ground speed, about 214 miles per hour. Seems fast, but it's not enough. Not with that weight, not with that drag, not with only 2 engines working. The vertical speed, the rate of climb, begins to decrease. 200 feet per minute, 100 feet per minute, 50 FPM. And then, the nightmare. 0. The aircraft stops climbing. It's flying level at 175 feet. Neither climbing nor descending. For exactly 3 or 4 seconds, the MD-11 hovers there, suspended in a kind of impossible balance between insufficient thrust and excessive weight. Below, people look up and see a scene that seems unreal. A giant UPS freighter, brown and cream, flying absurdly low with a huge flame coming out of the tail. Someone manages to capture a video on their cell phone. This footage would later be replayed millions of times on the news. 16:10 p.m., the beginning of the end, loss of lift. The airspeed indicator begins to fall. 184 knots. 182 knots. 180 knots. This is the death sentence. When you lose speed in a heavy airplane, you lose lift. Wings need fast air passing over them to generate lift. Decrease speed, decrease lift. The captain knows what's happening. He sees the instruments. He feels the controls becoming less responsive. He knows. It's not gonna hold, he shouts to the co-pilot. He tries to push the yoke forward, trading altitude for speed. It's a classic maneuver. You point the nose down, gain speed, then pull up again. But there's no altitude to spare. There's only 175 feet between them and the ground. The MD-11 begins to descend, gently at first, almost imperceptible, but the descent rate increases rapidly, 100 feet per minute, 300 FPM, 500 FPM. They're sinking. 5:16:15 p.m. Past the runway, industrial zone ahead. The aircraft crosses the southern boundary of the airport. The runway is behind them. Now below is an industrial zone. And here's another tragedy within the larger tragedy. For some absurd reason of urban planning, right in the approach and departure zone of one of the world's busiest cargo airports, someone allowed industrial companies to set up. Companies working with hazardous materials. Directly ahead of the descending MD-11 are 2 buildings. The first is a petroleum recycling company. Let me repeat that. Petroleum recycling. They process used oil, oily residues from industries. There are tanks full of flammable substances all over the place. The second building is an automobile junkyard. Dozens, maybe hundreds of old cars piled up. And old cars contain what? Tanks with gas remnants, batteries with acid, transmission fluids, motor oil, all flammable. Inside these 2 buildings, at that exact moment, there are people working. Employees at the recycling plant checking tanks, operating pumps, junkyard workers sorting parts, cataloguing inventory, possibly some customers looking at used cars. None of them have any idea what's about to happen. 16:25 p.m., the final seconds. Inside the MD-11 cockpit, the 3 pilots fight with all their strength against the controls. The captain has both hands on the yoke, pulling back with all the physical force he possesses. The co-pilot helps, pushing the thrust levers beyond limits, trying to squeeze every gram of extra thrust from the 2 remaining engines. But physics doesn't negotiate, my friend. Doesn't matter how experienced you are. Doesn't matter how skilled. Doesn't matter how much you want the plane to climb. If you don't have enough energy, you don't climb. The ground proximity warning system, the system that warns when you're too close to the ground, begins screaming in the cabin, "Terrain, terrain, pull up, pull up," as if they weren't trying. 50 feet altitude, 40 feet, 30 feet. The captain sees the recycling plant building appear ahead through the windshield. He knows they're not going to clear it. He knows. 5:16:30 p.m. Initial impact. The left wing. The MD-11's left wing strikes the top of the petroleum recycling plant building. It's not a grazing collision. It's not a soft touch. It's an aluminum-reinforced wing weighing several tons, traveling at 200 miles per hour, loaded with 13,000 gallons of fuel, cutting through a structure of concrete and steel. The wing metal tears. The building's beams break. But the law of action and reaction also applies. The building destroys the wing. The wing breaks apart. The internal fuel tank ruptures instantly. Jet A1 under pressure pours out in a mist. And fuel mist in the presence of sparks and hot metal means only one thing: explosion. An orange and white fireball expands in fractions of a second. The shockwave breaks all the building's windows. Workers who were meters from the impact point are instantly consumed by flames. Others are hit by flying debris, wing pieces, concrete fragments, structure parts. The sound is deafening. It's not like explosions in movies. It's a deep whump you feel in your chest, followed by the roar of flames. 16:35 p.m. Main impact, the fuselage. But the MD-11's fuselage is still intact, and it's still moving at hundreds of miles per hour. With the left wing destroyed, the aircraft rolls violently to that side. The nose points down. And then the main body of the plane, 200 feet long, 220,000 pounds of aluminum cargo and fuel, crashes into the industrial complex. The impact is devastating. The fuselage disintegrates. The forward section, the cockpit where the three pilots are, is crushed instantly between the aircraft's mass and the ground and structure's resistance. There's no possible survival. The deceleration is so brutal it's measured in hundreds of Gs. The human body can't withstand more than 20 or 30 Gs. Here it was much more. The center section of the fuselage, where the main fuel tanks and most of the cargo are, hits the junkyard. Cargo pallets are violently ejected. Stacked cars are crushed. And then comes the second massive explosion when the center tanks rupture. Now it's not 13,000 gallons of fuel. It's the remaining 38,000 gallons, almost 26,000 gallons of Jet A1 going into combustion. 16:40 p.m. The secondary explosion. The fireball this time is gigantic. It rises 150, 200 feet in the air. The heat wave is so intense, it ignites everything within 300 feet. Cars in the junkyard explode one after another as their gas tanks reach ignition temperature. Batteries explode. Tires burn, releasing toxic black smoke. At the petroleum recycling plant, the used oil storage tanks begin catching fire. Now you have three fuel sources feeding the inferno: aviation fuel, car gasoline, and recycled petroleum. It's an apocalyptic scenario. 5:17 p.m. First emergency calls. Louisville's 911 is instantly flooded with calls. The lines light up all at once like a Christmas tree. A plane crashed. A giant plane crashed near the airport. There's huge fire. Explosions. We need help. People are trapped. My God, there are people trapped in the buildings. Dispatchers try to stay calm, obtain precise information, coordinate response, but the scale of the disaster is immediately obvious. It's not a small accident. It's mass catastrophe. 5:20 p.m. Fire Department response. The first Louisville Fire Department units arrive in 4 minutes. 4 minutes, that's exemplary response. But when they arrive, the scene paralyzes them for a few seconds. Even veteran firefighters who've seen everything are shocked. 2 industrial buildings completely destroyed. Fire of immense proportions. Flames 60 feet high. Black smoke rising hundreds of feet, visible from across the city. Aircraft debris scattered over an area the size of 2 football fields. Pieces of fuselage with the brown UPS logo still visible among the flames. Burning packages, exploding cars. The heat is so intense the firefighters can't get close, and worst of all, the screams. People trapped in rubble calling for help. The incident commander immediately requests massive reinforcements. We need all available units. Commercial aircraft accident with multiple casualties. Large-scale fire. Collapsed structures. I'm going to need urban search and rescue. Medical teams. Everything. 5:02 p.m. Immediate airport closure. In the Muhammad Ali Airport Control Tower, controllers act quickly. All takeoffs are immediately cancelled. All aircraft in the air waiting to land are diverted to alternate airports. Attention all aircraft on frequency. Louisville Airport is closed until further notice. Repeat, field is closed. Fire and debris in southern perimeter zone. But here's the problem. You can't simply close the world's largest air cargo hub without massive consequences. Hundreds of planned flights, millions of packages awaiting processing, dozens of planes already in the air coming to Louisville. All need to be redirected to Cincinnati, to Indianapolis, to Memphis. It's a logistical nightmare. Inside the world port, where 20,000 workers are processing packages, evacuation alarms begin to sound. People stop what they're doing, confused. Why evacuation? The accident was outside, but it's protocol. Nobody knows if there's risk of secondary explosions, of spilled fuel reaching other areas, of structural collapse. So they evacuate. 5:45 p.m. Arrival of additional resources. Now there are over 50 emergency vehicles on site. Fire trucks from Louisville, from neighboring suburbs, even from adjacent cities. Ambulances, police cruisers. Technical rescue teams with heavy cutting and lifting equipment. News helicopters begin circling the area, their cameras capturing images that would be broadcast live to the entire world. The smoke still rises, dense and black. Firefighters manage to establish a perimeter and begin attacking the fire from multiple angles. But it's difficult. Aviation fuel burns at extremely high temperatures. Water alone isn't enough. You need special suppression foam. 6:30 p.m. First victims recovered. As flames begin to be controlled in some areas, search teams begin the horrible work of looking for victims. The 3 pilots are found still in the cockpit wreckage. There was no suffering. Death was instantaneous on impact. In the buildings, the situation is more complex. Some victims are found quickly. Others are under tons of debris. The removal work takes hours and can't be rushed. Moving debris incorrectly can cause secondary collapses. Night of November 4th to 5th. Tireless work. Over 100 firefighters work in shifts throughout the night. The fire continues to be a problem. Every time they think it's controlled, pockets of fuel trapped in the debris reignite and flames return. Under powerful work lights that turn night into day, teams continue. Cutting metal, removing rubble, searching for survivors who, tragically, don't exist. Ursteinmun, November 5th, 8 a.m., NTSB arrival. A National Transportation Safety Board GO team arrives from Washington, D.C. on the first morning flight. There are 28 specialized investigators, aeronautical engineers, engine specialists, wreckage analysis experts, human factors investigators. Board member Todd Inman takes over as on-site spokesperson. He holds a press conference at 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time. "We're in the early stages of a complex investigation," he explains, his grave voice reflecting the seriousness of the moment. "What I can confirm is that we've recovered both flight recorders, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. They're being sent to our laboratories in Washington for forensic analysis." A reporter asks, "Do you already know the cause?" Inman shakes his head. "It would be irresponsible to speculate at this time. What we know is that multiple witnesses and surveillance cameras captured evidence of fire on engine number 2 during the takeoff roll. But determining why that fire started, why it wasn't contained, and the exact sequence of events will require detailed analysis." Investigation lines. The NTSB divides the investigation into working groups. Engines and Systems Group. They'll examine every recovered piece from engine number 2. What caused the catastrophic failure? Was it an internal mechanical failure? Maybe a turbine blade that broke loose and punctured the nacelle? Was it a fuel line that ruptured, spraying kerosene over hot engine surfaces? Was it a maintenance problem, something improperly installed or inspected during the heavy check in San Antonio? Operations Group. They'll reconstruct minute by minute what happened. Review all radio communications. Interview air traffic controllers who were on duty. Analyze radar data showing the aircraft's exact trajectory. Human Factors Group. They'll examine the crew's decisions. Was the choice to continue after V1 correct? Was there anything they could have done differently? Spoiler, probably not. What were their work schedules like? Were they rested? Were there operational pressures? Maintenance Group. They'll review all maintenance records for that specific aircraft, every inspection, every repair, every part replaced. They'll particularly scrutinize that recent heavy check. Was it done correctly? Was any step skipped? Was any critical component installed incorrectly? Survivability Group. They investigate factors affecting survival, or in this case, the lack of it. Why couldn't people in the buildings escape? Were exits blocked? Did alarm systems work? This is important for preventing ground deaths in future accidents. Black box analysis. In Washington, technicians begin the meticulous work of extracting data from the recorders. The flight data recorder stores hundreds of parameters: speed, altitude, control positions, engine power, temperature, pressure, control surface positions, and much more. Second by second, The data reveals exactly what the plane was doing. The cockpit voice recorder captured the last 120 minutes of audio in the cabin, conversations between pilots, radio communications, alarms, ambient sounds, including the moment when the engine failed. These recordings are painful to listen to. Investigators hear professional men fighting an impossible situation, hear the growing tension in voices, hear the final seconds before impact. But these recordings are also crucial. They reveal exactly what the crew knew when they knew it and how they reacted. Wreckage examination. Meanwhile, at the accident site, field investigators begin the laborious process of mapping and cataloging every piece of wreckage. They create a grid over the entire accident area. Each square is systematically searched. Every piece of debris is photographed, marked with GPS, catalogued. Critical pieces, particularly from engine number 2, are carefully packaged and sent to laboratories for metallurgical analysis. What are they looking for? Evidence of fatigue failure, cracks that grew over time, evidence of instant overload, torn metal, evidence of exposure to extreme heat, melted or deformed metal. Each piece tells part of the story. So did the final toll. The final toll was devastating, my friend, and I want you to understand we're not talking about numbers. We're talking about people, each with a story, each with family waiting at home. The 3 crew members. Although full names weren't released immediately, families need to be notified first, we know the following. They were 3 dedicated aviation professionals, men who loved flying, who chose a career in cargo aviation because they liked the independence, responsibility, technical challenges of long transoceanic flights. They had wives or husbands at home, children, elderly parents, friends, colleagues who'd flown with them for years, and they died doing exactly what they were trained to do, trying to save an aircraft in an emergency. Ground victims, 11 innocent lives. At least 11 people on the ground lost their lives, among them workers at the petroleum recycling plant who were just doing their normal Tuesday afternoon work, junkyard employees cataloguing parts, a child, my friend. Maybe a worker's son, maybe visiting dad at work. This particular death destroys me inside. Possibly some customers who were at the junkyard looking for car parts. Total 14 confirmed dead. This makes it the deadliest accident in UPS Airlines history, a company that's been flying since 1988, that's accumulated millions of flight hours, millions of takeoffs and landings, and this is the worst disaster. 15 injured. 15 people survived but were injured, some with burns, others with crush trauma, others with injuries from toxic smoke inhalation. UFL Health, the University of Louisville Health System, received these 15 victims. Medical teams worked through the night stabilizing patients, treating burns, performing emergency surgeries. Miraculously, 14 of these 15 patients were discharged the next morning. Injured, traumatized, but alive. Shattered families. In the following days, 15 families reported loved ones as missing. The anguish of these hours is unimaginable, not knowing if your father, your brother, your son is alive or dead. Calling hospitals, going to reunification centers, waiting for news that doesn't come. Slowly, some of these people were located. They were in different hospitals or had left work early or weren't at the location at the time of impact. But for other families, the news was the worst possible. One-Ups Airlines, a company in mourning. UPS Airlines issued an official statement hours after the accident. With profound sadness, we confirm the loss of 3 crew members in the Flight 2976 accident. Our UPS family is devastated. We extend our deepest condolences to the families, friends, and colleagues of the crew and all ground victims. We're cooperating fully with the NTSB and all investigative authorities. Safety is and always will be our #1 priority. The company temporarily suspended all nighttime operations in Louisville. The World Port, which normally processes 2 million packages per night, fell silent. It was like stopping the heart of American logistics. Flags at UPS headquarters in Atlanta were lowered to half-staff. Political reactions. Kentucky Senators Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul expressed condolences. Representative Morgan McGarvey, whose district includes Louisville, publicly thanked first responders' bravery. The men and women of our fire department risked their lives entering that inferno to search for survivors. They represent the best of humanity. Governor Andy Beshear declared flags at half-staff throughout Kentucky for 3 days. Visual solidarity. The Big Four Bridge, a historic railroad bridge converted to a pedestrian walkway that crosses the Ohio River between Louisville and Jeffersonville, Indiana, was illuminated in yellow, one of UPS's main colors, in solidarity. It was a powerful visual symbol. At night, that bright yellow bridge against the dark sky became a kind of impromptu memorial. People gathered there, lit candles, left flowers. Vigils and memorials. In the following days, several vigils were held. A particularly touching one happened at the Worldport itself, where thousands of UPS employees gathered in silence. Many cried openly. Some held photos of the deceased crew members, colleagues they'd flown with, friends of years. The Mantrimarm, what aviation must learn. Look, my co-pilot, now I need to change tone here, because tears and condolences are important, but they don't prevent the next accident. Cold analysis and concrete changes prevent. First lesson, the V1 doctrine needs to evolve. V1 speed was established decades ago. The idea is simple. Before V1, you can abort safely. After V1, you have to continue because you don't have enough runway to stop. This has worked well for decades, saved countless lives by giving pilots a clear, simple rule. But Flight 2976 exposed a weakness in this doctrine. What if continuing after V1 isn't viable? What if you physically can't gain enough altitude with the remaining engines? Currently, the V1 decision is binary. Abort or continue, period. There's no margin for crew judgment about the severity of the failure. Maybe it's time to develop intelligent systems that automatically assess the nature of the emergency and present pilots not just continue, but continue is viable, or continue is not viable. This would require sophisticated sensors, complex algorithms, maybe artificial intelligence. But think with me, if the Flight 2976 pilots had had a display showing uncontained fire on Engine 2, takeoff performance compromised, maybe they would have made a different decision. Maybe they would have tried to abort despite being past V1. Maybe they would have collided with airport barriers, but inside the airport where emergency teams are immediately available instead of in an industrial zone a mile away. I'm not saying that's the right answer. I'm saying we need to ask this question. Second lesson, industrial zones near airports. Can you believe there's a petroleum recycling company in Louisville's departure zone? Can you believe it? Airports have what we call approach and departure zones, areas under the flight path of planes taking off and landing. Historically, we've tried to keep these zones free of tall buildings. For obvious reasons, plane and building don't mix. But apparently there hasn't been much regulation about what type of buildings are allowed, so you get absurd situations like this. A facility storing thousands of gallons of flammable materials directly under the departure path of hundreds of planes per day. There needs to be stricter federal regulation. Industrial zones with hazardous materials shouldn't exist within, say, 2 miles of runways. Period. And look, I understand this is complicated. Many of these airports were built decades ago, and the city grew around them. You can't just expropriate hundreds of businesses. But at least for new airports or expansions, this needs to be taken into account. Third lesson, maintenance of aging cargo aircraft. N259 up was 34 years old. In commercial aviation, that's not considered old. There are planes 40, 50 years old still flying. As long as maintenance is done correctly, chronological age isn't necessarily a problem. But and here's the big but. Critical components like fuel lines, engine connections, support structures need increasingly frequent inspections as the plane ages. Fuel lines especially are vulnerable. They're exposed to constant vibrations, extreme temperature variations, from 76 degrees in cruise to plus 104 degrees on the ground, varying pressures. Over time, small cracks can develop. Connections can loosen microscopically. Support brackets can develop fatigue failure. Maybe it's time to require more frequent ultrasonic or radiographic inspections of fuel systems on cargo aircraft above a certain age. Maybe it's time to proactively replace fuel lines every X thousand flight hours instead of waiting to find a problem. Yes, this costs money. But you know what costs more? 14 lives, $100 million aircraft destroyed, A company paralyzed, a city traumatized. Fourth lesson, engine fire suppression systems. Commercial aircraft have fire suppression systems for engines. You detect fire, push a button, and an extinguishing agent is discharged inside the engine nacelle. But these systems have limitations. If the fire started outside the nacelle, say in an external fuel line that's pouring kerosene, the internal suppression system doesn't help at all. Maybe we need to develop external suppression systems too, or automatic systems that detect and isolate fuel leaks in milliseconds. Technology exists. We use similar systems in hazardous industrial facilities. Why not on planes? Fifth lesson, safety culture versus efficiency culture. Here I'm going to touch on a sensitive point, my friend. Modern cargo aviation operates with extremely tight efficiency margins. Every minute counts. Every pound of fuel saved increases profits. Planes fly at maximum weight whenever possible to maximize revenue per flight. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this. Efficiency is important. But there needs to be balance. When you operate at the limit every day, maximum weight, maximum fuel, tight schedules, fast turnarounds, you're leaving zero margin for error. And in aviation, you need margin. Maybe it's time for cargo airlines to rethink some protocols. Maybe flying at 95% of maximum weight instead of 100% would give a safety margin that could make a difference in an emergency like this. I know. This reduces efficiency, but what's the acceptable price of efficiency? What really haunts me? Here's what really disturbs me about Flight 2976, my co-pilot. Those 3 pilots did everything right. You understand what I'm saying? They followed procedures exactly. They made the correct decisions based on the training they received, training that was developed by decades of experience, by aviation safety experts, by brilliant engineers. When they detected fire after V1, they continued the takeoff, which is the correct procedure. When the plane wouldn't climb properly, they maintained speed and tried to optimize climb rate, which is the correct procedure. When they realized they weren't going to make it, they tried to control the descent trajectory, which is again the correct procedure, and yet everyone died. So the question that keeps me awake at night is, are the procedures wrong? Or is it that there are situations in aviation, rare situations but possible ones, where there simply is no right answer, where physics conspires in such a way that no matter what you do, the outcome will be tragic? And if that's the case, how do we deal with that? How do we tell pilots' families that their loved ones did everything right and it still wasn't enough? How do we sleep at night knowing that tomorrow we ourselves might face a similar situation? The illusion of total safety. Look, modern aviation is incredibly, absurdly safe. You're statistically safer inside a commercial aircraft than inside your own car driving to the supermarket. But it's not 100% safe, never will be. Because aviation involves complex machines made by humans, maintained by humans, operated by humans. Flying through a hostile environment, air at 7 miles altitude is deadly to humans, carrying enough energy in fuel form to obliterate an entire city block. And sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, everything goes wrong at the same time at the worst possible moment. Flight 2976 was one of those times. It's November 6, 2025, 2 days after the accident. In Louisville, life slowly returns to normal. The airport reopened. The world port returned to operation, though with a respectful silence among workers. Packages flow again, but for 14 families, life will never be normal again. For the pilot colleagues of those 3 crew members, every takeoff now carries extra weight. A reminder that our profession, however routine it seems most days, carries real risks. For the aviation industry as a whole, Flight 2976 becomes another case study, another lesson, expensive, tragic, but vital, about the limits of technology and human procedures. NTSB investigators will continue their work for months, maybe years. The final report will be hundreds of pages. Recommendations will be made. Some will be implemented. Others will be debated, diluted, or ignored for economic or political reasons. And then, inevitably, there will be another accident. Because aviation is like that. We learn from tragedies, we improve, we become safer, but never perfectly safe. A final reflection. You agree with me that maybe it's time to fundamentally rethink some aspects of modern aviation? I'm not talking about cosmetic changes. I'm talking about deep questions. Has the pursuit of maximum efficiency gone too far? Are our emergency procedures robust enough for extreme situations? Is the technology we have not being applied where it really matters? I don't have answers, only questions, and a deep sadness for 14 lives lost on a November afternoon in Louisville. If you made it this far with me on this difficult journey, thank you. I know it's not easy to hear stories like this, but they're important. Every aviation accident victim deserves to be remembered not just as a statistic, but as a real person whose death can teach us something. If you enjoyed this episode, though enjoyed is a strange word for a tragedy, leave your like. If you have opinions about the issues I raised, V1 procedures, industrial zones near airports, safety culture, leave them in the comments. I read them all, and the discussion is important. And if you know someone who works in aviation, give that person a hug today, because they carry responsibilities most people can't imagine. This is Captain Peter Mercer. That was the story of UPS Airlines Flight 2976, a tragedy reminding us that even doing everything right, sometimes it's not enough. A story about dedicated professionals who died trying to save an impossible situation. A story about innocent lives lost for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And a story about the difficult questions the aviation industry needs to face if we truly want to honor these memories. Thanks for being my co-pilot on this painful but necessary journey. See you on the next flight.